Dear students and colleagues from the De La Salle University in the Philippines, congratulations for organizing this very important webinar. The student government of the university deserves a big applaud, and all those colleagues who are involved in celebrating this International Lasallian Days for Peace deserve a lot of appreciation. I want to thank you for inviting me as well. So, peace and sustainable development are at the heart of UNESCO's work, which I will be illustrating to you today. Um, UNESCO is United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization. We have two overarching objectives: peace, contributing to lasting peace, and sustainable development. Sustainable development, which can help eradicate poverty. We have priorities such as Africa and gender, and we are also putting special emphasis on small islands and developing states, least developed countries, and countries in transition. So, the areas you are discussing in the context of peace, especially poverty, the areas related to gender, and the areas related to social inequality is very important, and I will be giving some examples today. Let me go to UNESCO's Constitution first. It's very important for us to understand this statement. Since wars begin in the minds of men and women, it is in the minds of men and women that the defenses of peace must be constructed. So, through education, through science, through culture, through communication information, and social and human sciences, through better knowledge, we can create intercultural dialogue, better understanding of our world, and that's the way we can help create peace. So that's the constitution of UNESCO. My office in Asia Pacific works for 49 countries, including the Philippines. So first, from the point of view of being a regional science bureau for Asia and Pacific, we are fostering sciences for sustainable development, and of course, science, engineering, technology, innovation, very important areas, and how can we bring them for lasting peace and sustainable development. But also we work for all areas of UNESCO, which is education, science, culture, communication, information, and social and human sciences in countries, what we call our cluster countries, where Philippines is a very important country for us. And I will be giving some examples from Philippines, from Indonesia, Malaysia, Timor-Leste, and Brunei for today's meeting. So let's first try to understand there are severe imbalances between people and planet. There are severe imbalances between people themselves at different levels. And you can see those imbalances around you. So there can be very rich people or there can be very, very poor people. And here is an example. You can see on one side, we have those high-rise buildings, maybe where some of the richest people may also be living. And then we have the slums on the left-hand side. And there are inequalities between genders. So, for example, for only the 1% of the richest people own more than 40% of the global assets, whereas 50% of the global poor people, they own less than 1% of world's assets. So this is a huge problem with inequality, with social inequalities, and of course, women earn less than only 10% of the global income. So we have serious challenges to consider, and that's where our programs are geared towards understanding those inequalities and how UNESCO can bring the knowledge from all disciplines to help solve those challenges. Also, there is a major problem with social inequalities related to human health, and that's where there are some people in the world who are dying because of many curable diseases, and because simply they do not have the medicines or the technology, and while the other nations may have the best of the technology, the best of the medicines. So how can we work on those challenges? Also, the food differences, food availability differences. So while many nations have surpluses of food, while still many people go hungry every day. So we have those challenges of inequalities which are becoming bigger. Then, of course, then there are challenges related to the extinction of species, with respect to also the greenhouse emissions, with respect to the global temperature. So the planet Earth is certainly badly impacted because of all the social inequalities and also because of the rapid acceleration of degradation processes. Let's look into last 200 years, and this is analysis up to 2018. And if you think of the most recent 2 years, you will be able to draw some further comparisons. If we look into the change of development by factors of magnitude, then population multiplied in 200 years by a factor of 7.5. GDP multiplied by a factor of more than 400. And if we look into per capita GDP, then maybe multiplication is by 65 times. If you look into energy, again, very big changes have happened. CO2 emissions, of course, went up, and our mobility has gone up by thousands of times, as well as urbanization is our big challenge. And that's the challenge also in Philippines, and where you have cities like Manila, where transport big issue, where the air quality is a big issue, water quality is a big issue, and those issues are in many such cities in the world. Also, because of the massive pollution, because of the urbanization, because of industrialization, our water sources have been disrupted. We have serious issues with the quality of our soils and air pollution. We have pollutions because of excessive use of fertilizers and pesticides on agriculture. And at the same time, there are environmental and public health impacts as well. So in the context of inequalities, we need to think about the massive issues related to pollution. And those people who are at the receiving end may not have the ability to deal with these issues. Then natural disasters are also going up. So we know disasters like Yolanda, for example, in case of the Philippines. But there are many floods, many more droughts. There are major earthquakes and tsunamis which are affecting our region all the time, and their magnitude is becoming bigger and bigger. Then also oceans are at risk. There is pollution, there is overfishing, there is acidification, coral bleaching, species are becoming extinct, sea levels are rising. Many cities can be inundated very, very quickly into the near future, and many of them are already inundated as well. Then also, if we look into the future, what it may hold by 2050, with the way we are already having our ecological footprints. Our ecological footprints in the year 2008, they were already more than what one Earth can sustain. And if we continue in the same way, then we need 3 planet Earth by 2050. Unless we reduce, we reuse, we recycle, we reduce social inequalities, we reduce poverty, we cannot come back to the equilibrium with what Earth can sustain. So, what are our options? Should we become more efficient, or should we find 2 other planets by 2050 where we should move and we should maybe continue on the same path? So, the simple message is we need to consider about these inequalities, we need to consider about ecological footprints, and we need to think about the issues of gender and poverty very carefully. So if we look into the lifestyles between different nations, if everyone wants to live the lifestyle of US, then perhaps we will need 4 planet Earths. If we think about the UK, we need more than 2. So whereas some other nations, maybe they are using much lesser. So we need to carefully see what is our rightful use of resources in this world, and how can we become more responsible, and how can we solve those issues. Let's come back to the issue of the social inequalities. I would like to draw your attention to this UNESCO report on world social science, and of course it deals with the challenges of inequalities, pathways to just world. This report is available free of charge as an open access report. I recommend that you download and you look into what came in 2016. And of course, there are many more challenges which are coming through. So I will be giving you some ideas from this report towards the end as well. Okay, let's look into one issue at a time. So let's look into gender equality and what UNESCO is doing. So gender inequality is a very big challenge. So how can we bring gender equality? So education is one of the very important ways to address the gender equality issues. So if we have quality education which is for all, and is also addressing the special issues which the girls and women face, then we can help bring a level playing field for everyone to be educated and for everyone to progress into their lives. Also, in the areas of natural sciences, we promote women in science. We have special programs for women leadership in science. In the area of social and human sciences, we are working on how can we assess the policies of a nation, whether they are inclusive, whether they are addressing the human rights issues and the sustainable development. And then also another very important area is the area of culture. Culture is critical for us to understand each other, to understand our environment, our history, and how we can move to future while we care for all what culture can contribute to our lives. Now, let's look further into the challenge of gender-based violence and how education can help. So there are special curricula which UNESCO is working on to prevent gender-based violence for teachers and students. We also have the concept of education for sustainable development and how do we bring the knowledge of our world very carefully into the sustainability aspects of our education and better understanding of each other. Now, this global citizenship education that's critical for empowering a world which is peaceful, inclusive, and which is secure. These materials are available online, and you are welcome to look for UNESCO. So, going back into addressing social inequalities, of course, the global citizenship education that's a key. Also, we have a lot of material which is available. There are UNESCO centers which are working in these areas of education for sustainable development and global citizenship education. So I invite you to carefully look into those material, and if you wish, we can link with you from UNESCO office Jakarta to work with your university and for you to learn individually as well. There is this Global Education Monitoring Report. In 2020, the report focused on inclusion and education, and very important area, of course, for the world, and very important also for what we are doing. This particular report has 10 recommendations for addressing social inequalities. So this report, again, is open access and available for you. Let me come back to gender and science. So I've introduced special programs which are for women in science. We have a special partnership in the Philippines as well with the L'Oreal, where we are promoting the best scientists and how can we help them become leaders. And there are serious challenges in many countries. Philippines, by the way, is doing very well on the gender issues, and there's so many capable female scientists in the Philippines. So I really congratulate them and their excellent work. We have a special program on STEM, the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and it has a special dimension about gender. Again, a global project which you can look into our websites. It's supported by the Swedish government. Also, we have an International Day of Women and Girls in Science. It's celebrated on the 11th of February. So gender is a critical issue which we are trying to address into our programs. Also, from a poverty reduction point of view, culture has a very important role to play. For us to understand what are the skills which are available over longer period of time, and how can we empower those local artisans? Here you have the example of the rice terraces, which are amazing from the Philippine World Heritage. There are people who can really contribute so many interesting things towards tourism. And the other example you have is from India and the technical know-how they bring over years in terms of the different construction techniques. In the area of communication and information, gender equality for media and protection of female journalists, very critical. If we cannot have a free media, we will have serious problems for the society to address the issues of poverty, social inequality, and all what really matters for peace and sustainable development. I also want to draw your attention to special days. As I've highlighted to you before, the days related to science, the days related to Women Day, the days which are related to the elimination of violence, gender-based violence. So these slides will be available to you, hopefully, and you can certainly look into them. We also have a special emphasis on girls and their education. Let's look into what we have been doing recently in UNESCO Office Jakarta. We have been implementing several initiatives on education, for example, learning for empathy, the areas which are related to the prevention of violent extremism, the areas which are related to also human rights-based approaches during the COVID-19 lockdown. We are very actively working with youth and promoting the sports. And also there are emphasis on special aspects of how can we bring positive thinking and how can we bring better kind of support for the victims of domestic violence. So that's where yoga can play a very important role as well. And we have been also working on psychosocial support for victims of the big disasters like Yolanda, and with the DAPAD in Philippines, this partnership has been very, very successful. Here is an example of the partnership in Philippines for better life for out-of-school girls. And as you know, out-of-school girls have those circumstances which are not really in their hand. If they drop out of their school, can we bring them back to the mainstream education system, to alternative learning systems? Can we help them bring life skills? So this is the work we are doing with COICA and with the DAPAD. And in Tacloban, we are building a special facility which addresses some of these challenges as well. Let's continue with other activities which we are doing from our office in Jakarta. By the way, this is the photo of my office and some of the related meetings taking place. But of course, we work very closely with the stakeholders in the countries we serve. We are working on the ESD and global citizenship education as part of Sustainable Development Goal number 4 and its target 4.7. We also have special training for ESD targeted at high schools, technical and vocational education in countries such as Timor-Leste. But also very importantly, we are working on how can we have better life for young people through sports and the important role which they can play. And that's the work happening in Indonesia, also in Timor-Leste as well. Let's come back to the human rights and sustainable development goals. We need to continue to think about both of them together. So we have basic human rights, like education is a basic human right. Water is a basic human right. Our culture is a basic human right. Access to our science and technology is a basic human right. So there should be no digital divide. We should be able to have access to good education leading to better achievement in life and better jobs as well. So all of them are very important. So that's where these projects linking with ecotourism, linking with how can we have evidence base for better policies, how can we bring different SDGs like SDG number 10 on social inequalities and SDG number 16 on governance in our cluster countries. We have a policy lab which you can access and see how can we assess whether any policy is valorizing the inclusiveness and the evidence basis there. I also wish to welcome you to our webinar series. So here is one which is related to today's meeting as well. So this particular webinar focused on education, evidence base for inclusive literacy, for better education, leaving no one behind. We have a big area of youth and young professionals in Asia and the Pacific and their engagement for disaster risk reduction, and they have been very active during the times of COVID. If you want to follow any of these areas, you can follow them through UNESCO Office Jakarta, Facebook, or through my own Facebook as well. So there are important areas where we are bringing these issues related to sustainability, issues related to inclusiveness, peace, issues of gender, and how can we address social inequalities at different levels. Let me draw some key conclusions. And these conclusions are also from the social science report of 2016, and I customized them for today's meeting. So first of all, reducing inequalities is required if we want to achieve global peace. And if we want to have better human rights for everybody, a just world. And very importantly, if the sustainable development goals have to be achieved by 2030, leaving no one behind. Inequalities need to be understood and addressed in relation to different income groups, their wealth, bringing on board socio-economic differences, cultural differences, environmental considerations, and how people differ between different areas, even within a country or within a city. So we need to understand all of that very, very carefully. How can we open up spaces for novel solutions for dealing with inequalities or dealing with poverty? How can there be more socio-technopreneurship for better jobs, for also dealing with these gender issues as well? We need inter and transdisciplinary approaches. We need to work across different scales, and we need to think for global inclusive approaches. And those globally inclusive approaches are such as, for example, global citizenship education, for also making sure the standards of education are the same wherever you go. Everyone has a right to job. Nobody sleeps hungry, and no one is poor anymore. So those are very important goals within the Sustainable Development Goals as well. And how can we have better gender equity and gender quality, making sure that the equality of gender prevails. So with that, I thank you all, and I wish you a wonderful webinar. You can look into Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, and if you have any specific questions for me, I will be very happy to answer them. So with that, I thank you again for inviting me, and have a wonderful webinar. Thank you very much.